The first textbook, the historical sociology, Philip Abrams is one of the best, the leading sociologist in our decade, our century. But unfortunately, he got dead in his 40s. He was dead, and this book was actually posthumously his friends collected his articles and published it. And this book is just one of the many books. It really is one of the best books in historical sociology in particular, and social science in general. So I ask you to read carefully into this book. It's so well written. I actually read this book. This is more than 10 times I read it. But whenever I read it again and again, it occurs to me, it really is a brilliant piece. It's not just one of the books. It's one of the best books. So I ask you to read carefully. And I ask myself, what is the difference between Durkheim and Marx and Weber? Last week, I somewhat, at the end of the class, I come to realize that you guys don't have any idea about the difference between Durkheim and Marx and Weber. I did not cover Weber yet, but I will put my emphasis on the difference between Marx and Weber, Marx and Durkheim. The big difference between Durkheim and Weber, Marx, is that actually Durkheim coined that concept, industrialism. He tried to depict that scene. The people who are living in the past in rural area, in villages, living in communities as a member of that village. Usually that kind of village is constituted in the family members and relatives and neighbors. They are all acquainted very well, and they have person-to-person, the face-to-face relationships. But when the industrialization, after the Industrial Revolution and the political revolution, Industrial Revolution was epitomized in England, the big industries, and the urbanization began. And so people moved from rural areas to urban areas. What Durkheim focused is the transition from rural societies to urban societies, from villages to cities. Durkheim, he's watching over that process, the urbanization. Although he has some concerns about the process, industrialization and urbanization, but he mostly focused on the people as an individual. So he coined that word, industrialism. But Marx and Engels, they challenged that concept. It's not just industrialism. For example, Durkheim, from Durkheim's point of view, the division of labor means the division of labor produces individual. But for Marx and Engels, the division of labor leads to inequality, not just individualization. It produces inequality and also the class. Because after the individualization, the people are not only just divided into individual, but also regrouped into a class. It's not just individualization process, that urbanization and the industrialization process accompanies the class division. Because in that capitalist society, we have owner class, the capitalist class, and the wage laborers. So the big difference between Durkheim and Marx is the end result of the division of labor. For Durkheim, it produces individuality. For Marx and Engels, it produces class, inequality. And furthermore, for Marx and Engels, if there were class division between have class and have not class, the have class, they have all the means of power, consolidating their power, so they produce law, political institutions, and religious institutions, and also the cultural institutions that will guarantee their class domination, that will legitimize their class domination. But in doing so, they produce, quote, the illusionary common interest. Illusionary common interest. If the people, the lay people, the ordinary people, they come to realize their society is divided into classes and they belong to have not classes, they are very unhappy. They think when they work hard, they cannot have their fair share of the production. So in order to mask, in order to veil, in order to cover up that kind of situations, the ruling class, they try to produce illusionary common interest, as if they are not belong to their own classes, but the common interest that was guaranteed by the state. So from Marx and Engels' point of view, the state is the institution that produce that, quote, that illusionary common interest of all the people, unquote. So from Marx and Engels' point of view, class power is the same as political power. And the political power was embodied in the institutions of the state. So the genius here in the Marx and Engels' social thoughts is that Durkheim and most of the social thinkers at that time, they think about, they watch it, they observed the urbanization, and the people, they are freed from their community, their villages. When they come to the city area, they become a free man and woman. They are acting and thinking as an individual, not as a member of families or a member of some communities. So Durkheim is talking about the individualization process. But Marx and Engels, they also observed the individualization process, and also they focused on, they analyzed the same process is also the class division process. People are not just individual, they belong to their classes. But when you read carefully at Marx and Engels' books and articles, they did not explain. When you were born, you were born in some specific family members, family groups. But to belong to one class is not predetermined. In modern society, you can change when you have some education and you have chances, you have some good luck, you can change your class belongings. But you should understand this capitalist society is class society. And there are a big war between the classes. You cannot easily transfer from one class position to another. It's very hard. Once it was established, it's getting the gap between capitalist class and the working class is getting wider and wider. The have class getting wealthier, have not class getting poorer. That's usually the dynamism of the capitalist society. I have a question of the Chinese student. In Korea, it's just beyond the question. It's almost certain Korea is a class society, right? There are some controversies over what kind of capitalist society. It's still an open controversy going out there. But how about China? Do you think your society is capitalist, the class divided society or not? Any Chinese student? Any idea?
I think it's not very clear gap between the so-called classes.
Not capitalist society.
The classes is if you must define what classes one person is, that's maybe not very suitable. So I think there are not very clear gaps between the so-called classes. The situation is quite complicated.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. Any other student? All share the same opinion?
I hold a different opinion. Since China is a very emerging, economics, I think in every such surging developing country, there must, bury a lot of conflicts, the conflicts of interest between different groups. Yeah, actually, as far as I'm concerned, I live in China. I think the gap between rich and poor is widening. However, the general welfare in China is also developing. So that's just, I think, two edges of a sword. But most of, especially on the internet, most of the people, they will argue about the current situation of China is very complicated.
So actually, her opinion is not the opposite, because I think China, there are maybe no classes in China, but there are groups. One individual, he can belong to several groups simultaneously, several interest groups.
There is always a wide gap between the official position of your government and your institution, and the feelings the ordinary people felt when they are living. All through my undergraduate days, our government, they prohibited any concept of class or class-related concept. Not just class struggle, but the very concept of class was prohibited. We always talk about stratification, not class. There are some differences in income levels and the living style, but not class division or any kind of class struggle or class conflict. You know, I'm not challenging the official viewpoint. I'm just asking you your personal opinion about your situation in China. I have much interest in China after the reform initiated by Deng Xiaoping in 1978, after the 8th Communist Party Congression. Yeah, it's okay, you know, whether you call your system as an industrialism or socialism in Chinese character or whatever, you are under the heat. There's a big transformation in China as well as in Korea. There are big industrial companies, complexes out there. People are getting more and more gathered together in urban areas. They join the factory works and many service sectors. So in total, we call it that industrialization. In Korea and China, we are under the process of rapid industrialization or compressed industrialization. That's for sure. Nobody can deny that changing the dynamism of our society. But it's controversial. under what kind of concept we can capture, we can catch, we can describe our society and the changing patterns of our society. Whether we call it industrial society or capitalist society or capitalism in Korean characteristics or socialism in Chinese characteristics. What I'm saying is this, why we should read these textbooks and authors like Durkheim, Marx and Weber. They are that social thinkers. They observed, they analyzed that kind of a great transformation in their days. Now we are living in the same vein, the same process of that industrial revolution. So we are sharing the same present, the same world. Just let me explain, in Korea, Korean students did not understand the situation. For example, one generation ago, 30 years ago, when I joined university, many of my friends in sociology department, when they applied for the universities, many of them watched the bus or taxi for the first time in their life. Nowadays, if you see, if you say, I saw the taxi bus or the K-tax for the first time in my life, many people think of you a kind of alien or kind of strangers, kind of foreigners. You cannot understand that guy is a member of our society. But just one generation ago in Korea, now when you have chances, the Chinese students to visit Korea, our railway system and the road system, we have a very well developed road construction company and institutions from Busan to Seoul and all around South Korea. We can reach within 3 hours by your own car. Within 3 hours. It's such a small world. But in the past, when I have some conversation with my parent generation, they are talking about when they from their own hometown, home village to Seoul. All the way, it takes not hours, days. So I heard one story. When one of my relatives have their own daughter get married to a man living in Gangwon province, it's a mountainous area. All the family members wept bitterly because when she married to that guy from Gangwon province, this mountainous area, remote area, all the family members, they anticipated they cannot see her again in their lifetime. That is such a remote area. So they never anticipated. They never have that expectation. They can see her again. So they wept. But just 2 decades later, the Korean government, they made some new road, the highways in that area. And it takes only less than 2 hours from their home village to that town, the husband villages, less than 2 hours. So nowadays, that daughter and that house, the daughter's house, became a kind of resort area. Every summer, all the family members moved to that area to enjoy that summer vacation. So after the road construction and the industrialization and urbanization, our lifestyle changed a lot. In the past, it's just no man's land. It's just such a remote area. And they all expected they cannot see her again. But now, it's less than 2 hours by car. So that's the net effect of the industrialization, urbanization, the modernization. Now, in Korea, in China, we confront the same kind of industrial transformation in our era. So, in some sense, we share the same present. In capitalist society, there are heavy classes, the owner of the surplus values, the surplus appropriators. They also has the means of consolidating their power, and they produce law, the legal system, political system, religious system, and also the cultural system. That's the superstructure. And in dominating, in governing their societies, the ruling class, according to Marx and Engels, they produce, quote, the illusionary common interest, just like national interest. That just going beyond the class interest. So when they talk about, they launch new project, they always talk about the national interest in the name of nation and state. They always talk about the common interest. But that's illusionary, according to Marx and Engels. And from the Marx and Engels point of view, the class power is the same as the political power. That means the class who owned the ownership of the means of production, they own that political power. So in capitalist society, it was divided into two big classes. One is capitalist class and the other is wage labor class. So all his and their life, Marx and Engels' life work is an attempt to unmask the facts of man-made exploitation behind the illusion of an externally given economy. Unmasking the structure and the dynamism of capitalist society is the lifelong goal of Marx and Engels. They unveiled the functioning of a capitalist society. That's what Marx and Engels did all through their life. Exploitation is one of the key concepts in Marx and Engels. Exploitation. It takes actually more than one semester to talk about the Marx's theory of exploitation. It's such a scientific and also very complex system. I recommend you to read the Marx masterpiece, the Das Kapital, the Capital, to understand his social thought. When we give lectures on Marx, we always emphasize there are two phases of Marx. One is scientific Marx, Marx as a social scientist, and the other one is Marx as a social revolutionary. Some people try to save scientific Marx. They just abandoning the revolutionary Marx. It's a kind of just like he has two faces. Once he is an angel, it turns into a kind of a demon. But I don't think so. If you want to understand someone and his or her thought, you should catch him in entirety, the totality. You cannot just read. Whenever you read the books, just think about that. Can you have that, keep that position when you read some books and when you can understand some part of that book or article, you think, oh, this guy is talking about this. But when you don't understand, you just miss that paragraph, that concept, the theories, that part of that book. And you think, oh, when I read his book, in my opinion, his social thought is blah, blah, blah. You just epitomize, you just digest, and you take his social thoughts as if you understand yourself. I don't think that kind of position can stand. You know, I think you should catch not only the social Marx as a social scientist, but also at the same time, you should take the revolutionary Marx into consideration. You cannot just separate. This is scientific Marx. Oh, you highly, estimate it really is a contribution to our social thought, but you just desert, abandon, that revolutionary Marx. That's a part, the bad Marx, good Marx. I don't think so. But many social scientists, many sociologists try to save Marx from scientific Marx, from revolutionary Marx. I think Marx in 1980s, Marx was introduced to South Korea. Actually, that in one text or one books published by Korean independent provisional government in Shanghai, they published books, and in that book they introduced Marx's social thought. In I think this is that word when they translate Marx, Karl Marx into I think it's here one more into Chinese character. They translated it like this, 마극사 in Chinese. This is Marx in Chinese character. So in the 1920s, the Korean intellectuals who studied in China and in Japan and in European countries, they encountered Karl Marx's social thought. After the 1917 Russian Revolution, the people all around the globe, especially the third world, the underdeveloped or the colonial countries, the Marx reputation is very high. Marx and Lenin. So they learned the Marx theory at the time, 1920s. And after the division, after the end of the Second World War and division of the Korean Peninsula in two parts and the breakout of the Korean War, from 1945 to 1948, the 3 years, Korean intellectuals, they again come to study the Marxism in 1945 until the breakout of the Korean War. But after the Korean War, all of the Marx book, Marx, Engels and Lenin's book was prohibited in Korean soil, South Korea. You cannot read, you cannot have their books, Marx and Engels' book. I'm just wondering, how about in China? Do you learn Marx's book in class, middle school, high school, or in university? Yeah.
It is a kind of compulsory class in every university and colleges. Compulsory class.
Compulsory class. What? Marx's theory or Marxism in general?
We can say that we just learn part of Marx theory, especially the theory of the classes division and capitalism. Capitalism, yeah.
I see.
For me, like in the Department of Economics, students must take the class of learn Marx capitalism.
I see. Yeah. If I have known that fact before, I will change my lecture style a bit.
We just learn part of it, and how to say, it's a kind of ideology. Yeah, it just adapted from the government. So we do not learn very detail about Marx as a socialist. We do not know thoroughly about his socialist theory.
But I think all of Marx's works were translated into Chinese, right?
Yeah.
Marx's book was translated into Chinese, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not very popular among students. We do not like it.
Nowadays, more and more in South Korea, Marx getting a reputation. In the past, he was just outlawed in Korean university, not just university, in Korean academia. So it's very, very ridiculous. Although we cannot read Marx and Engels' book and articles, but in our university, we have compulsory courses, just like in China now. There are some courses, criticism of Marxism, or criticism of socialism, communism. So it just makes no sense. They never gave us any materials, but just criticism of that thought, the theory. It's so ridiculous, but at that time, it's a kind of immune system. If you read Marx and Engels' book, you are immune to that kind of social theory because you already have your own vaccine. They are bad, They are just 100% just downright lies. They're just a liar. So when you have chances to encounter Marx and Engels' book, you just have enough power to confront their theory, not just endorsing or not just accepting their theory. That's what the Korean government has in mind. Critic of ideology. The ideology is Marx and Engels and the socialist thought. So even though in Korea we were prohibited of any kind of Marxism and socialism, we still learn many of Marx and Engels' main thesis, but in a very hygiene and it's so funny when I recall my university days. Now I ask my student to read Marx's book, especially Capital and class struggles in France. And Marx is not only a social scientist, but also his writing style is very enthusiastic. It's very dynamic. So when you have chances to read his book, it's not only the content, but the style. It's really very excellent. So in the U.S., it is the literary critics they import and they use the Marx and Engels legacies, not in political science or economics department, but literary criticism or cultural studies program. They teach and they learn Marx's theory. Yeah. So I think Marx, the image of Marx you can find in Philip Abrams' book here. It's very well nuanced. It's well written. Yeah. page 40. And page 41, the first line from above. From the point of view of understanding Marxism as a form of historical sociology, according to Philip Abrams, the essential elements of the thoughts of Karl Marx and Engels would seem to be: first, their sense of constantly two-sided interaction of action and structure, purpose and constraint through time as the basic form of history. And second, Marx and Engels' sense of the dynamism of the division of labor as a source of both new forms of individuality and new forms of inequality. So when you have the blank here in inequality, you can put that right word. That's the midterm exam. And third, their sense of the way in which the contradiction between the forces of production and the relations of production hardens into systems of class relationships and class domination. Because the division of labor in all its forms is also a division of appropriation and ownership. And this key concept here is contradiction. The contradiction between the forces of production and the relations of production. Contradiction. Fourth, their sense of the way in which class domination legitimates itself in the form of an illusory common interest embodied in religion, philosophy, law, and above all, the state. The state. Above all, the state. That's the key concept. State is the illusionary common interest embodied. So that at any given moment in history, the reality of class relationships is more or less thoroughly masked by an illusory world which the individual encounters as given, as the obvious and necessary context for his or her life. The central concern of Marx and Engels was, of course, to unmask reveal to unmask that illusory world as it existed in their own time. For them, for Marx and Engels, the 19th century end product of the history of the division of labor was not just industrialism, but a distinctive class structuring of industrialism in the form of bourgeois society, that is, capitalism. So when you describe Marx's theory of modern world, modern society, is capitalist society, not industrial society, not industrialism, but capitalism. The hallmark of capitalism as a form of the division of labor or the division of ownership is the emergence of a class of producers who can own nothing but their own labor power, which they are forced to sell in return for wages paid to them by a class who, for their part, own the whole array of the means of production. Large-scale industry is the distinctive form of production associated with this relationship, and the commodity. The standardized exchangeable object is its distinctive product. The commodity. You should remember this concept too. Commodity. Commodity. Always is a plural form. Commodity is not just a single form. It's, I don't know why he is talking is here. Commodity. I ask you to write the commodity, or it's a plural form, not noun form. The life work of Marx and Engels was, above all, an analysis of the real relationships of inequality, hidden within the apparently natural market laws and political arrangements associated with capitalism. An attempt to unmask the facts of man-made exploitation behind the illusion of an externally given economy. And the next page, Philip Abrams summarizes Marx and Engels' books about historical sociology in 3 parts. Marx's historical method. Second is Marx and Engels' analysis of historical cases, particular situations or episodes or events. And the third one is the whole process of historical genesis involved in the transition from one mode of production to another. Transition from feudalism to capitalism and capitalism to socialism. And this author, Philip Abrams, divided that part into 3. Marxist historical method. And from page 50, case studies, the failure of revolutions. Page 50, Marx's 2 long essays, The Class Struggles in France and the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. I strongly recommend you to read these 2 articles, this actually pamphlet. It's really one of the best articles written in social scientific world. It's really dynamic, concrete. The analysis is so vivid. He's just watching over the class struggles going on in his daytime, his days. And the transition from feudalism to capitalism. So this author, Philip Abrams, he just evades. He did not cover the transition from capitalism to socialism. In my opinion, I did not know about Philip Abrams in person, but he did not, in my opinion, my interpretation of his theory, he did not think of Soviet Union as a socialist country. If you think the Russian Revolution is really a socialist revolution, he include that episode, that case, as a transition from capitalism to socialism. He surely had to include that case, that episode, into this book. But he did not do that. He just omitted. I think it's intentional, not by accident. He didn't think of Russian Revolution as a socialist revolution. It's not a transition from capitalism to socialism. So he only covers that transition from feudalism to capitalism as a history. in here you can discern his very delicate position. Although he talked about Marx and Marxism, Marxist theories, he did not buy much about the Marxist theories. He tried to confine himself. There are some portions, some parts. Marx is a very brilliant historical sociologist. He buy some parts of the Marxist thought, and he find some materials, some stuffs in Marx's writings, but he, I think, intentionally just deserted, abandoned many portions of Marx and Engels' books and articles and pamphlets. As a scholar, I think he's very cautious, and I can understand his approach, his position. Maybe some people don't like this kind of summarizing Marxist social thought, but I think he's very cautious. Yeah. Any questions so far? Durkheim and Marx.